on the screen is a beautiful villa, and the house is still there from the days when Richard Wagner and his then mistress, Cosima, this is where they lived for a number of years. They were in exile from their original German home because of the scandal of their affair. She was married to somebody else, not him. And so those straight-laced Germans thought that was a terrible thing. So this is the house as it is now, and beautifully maintained, and it's a museum. And here are the famous residents, Richard Wagner, 1813 to 83, and Cosima. Cosima, at the moment when they were here, was married to Richard Wagner's very, very dear friend, Hans von Bülow, who was not quite as good a friend now as he'd been for their life. Von Bülow was a conductor, musician and conductor, adored Wagner, thought Wagner was the greatest composer of the day, and was somewhat shocked when he was informed that his wife was in love with Richard Wagner. And so the affair rocked Germany, and particularly Munich, where they were staging the operas. And so Wagner and Cosima moved to this beautiful villa thanks to the King of Bavaria. The King of Bavaria was Mad Ludwig, and you know who Mad Ludwig is and was because he built the spectacular castle, but also totally dedicated to Wagner's music and in love with him. The King of Bavaria was gay and was madly in love with Richard Wagner, and Wagner was not averse to letting the king be in love with him. That was fine with him as long as the king financed his lifestyle, which the king was happy to do. So the king was paying for this villa, and Cosima and Wagner were living here in splendid, magnificent luxury. They had something like 6 or 7 servants. They had 4 kids, 2 from her von Bülow marriage, then 2 from them. They had dogs and cats and horses and ponies and flamingos and everything you could imagine in this gorgeous villa, thanks to the King of Bavaria. Nietzsche, who was close by in Basel, was devoted to the music of Wagner. Wagner was already very famous at this point, and so he wrote to the Wagners and was invited to come, and the minute that he came to visit, they adored him. They thought he was brilliant, and of course they loved the fact that he thought Wagner's music was great. And so Nietzsche became almost another member of the family for the next few years. So they're living here at the villa very close to Basel, and so he can come and visit like on the weekends, and did. And Nietzsche is particularly crazy about Cosima because he and Cosima are close in age. So Cosima and Wagner were 25 years, Wagner was 25 years older, but Nietzsche and Cosima were just 2 years apart. So they were young buddies, young pals, and there's no question that Nietzsche was sort of secretly in love with Cosima. So he now falls into a wild devotion to the Wagners and to Wagner's music. Now, the reason I tell you about this period in his life is that up to this moment, he's the rational professor of philology and Greek, and that's the rational side of his personality. But now we see the romantic, the wild, devoted, totally unrestrained devotion to Wagnerian music, which is the height of German Romanticism. It doesn't get any more romantic than Wagner's opera. And so Nietzsche and his flirtation with both Wagners and his time here is a sign of the other side of Nietzsche. Nietzsche's wild fascination with Wagner and with Cosima, and incidentally, I didn't mention, did I? Cosima was the daughter of Liszt. Did I tell you that? She was also royalty aristocracy in the music world of 19th century Europe. A daughter of Liszt, wife of von Bülow, and girlfriend of Wagner. So that's pretty good right there. Now, in this period, they also had the idea that they would set up their own theater. So the Wagners, both of them, had in the back of their mind the idea that they would, at some point, build a theater in Germany somewhere so that they could then present the operas exactly the way they wanted to, produce the operas on a cycle and present the ones they wanted to. And the King of Bavaria was perfectly happy to finance it. So they discovered this location in Bayreuth in Bavaria, which some of you I'm sure have been to, where you can go even now to various operatic presentations. When our young professor Nietzsche went to visit Bayreuth and see what was going on, he was suddenly repulsed, because this was not the Wagner that he imagined. For him, Wagner was a very high-toned, sort of aristocratic, almost god of ancient sagas put to opera. And when he got to Bayreuth, what he saw were crowds and crowds of rich Germans decked out in their best clothes and their best jewels, flocking to Bayreuth so that they could then enjoy opera in their terms. And so all of a sudden, Nietzsche just packed up and left the Wagners without any word or without anything, and fled, he said, tired with disgust with all of this feminism and undisciplined rhapsody. He meant the stuff that was being shown here at Bayreuth, and idealistic lying, softening of the human conscience. So in other words, for Nietzsche, Wagner was the enshrinement of the tough virtues of ancient sagas. Instead, here he saw new operas that were sweet and soft and lovable. He particularly was outraged at Parsifal, which was the new opera, because it was an exaltation of Christianity and Christian piety and fleshless love and a world redeemed by a pure fool by the fool of Christ. Well, Nietzsche was just enraged at this. This was the opposite of what he thought Wagner was all about. So now he was disenchanted. He left the Wagners, and he never spoke to them again. It's just such a great episode in his life, because he's invited in to this enchanted circle. Everybody in Europe wanted to be invited into the Wagnerian villa, and he was, and treated like a member of the family. But then, when the material of the operas go the wrong way from his point of view, then he doesn't want anything to do with it. But at least he got a great book out of it all. So one of the things that he was doing was, of course, bringing together his experience with music and the Wagners and his ideas about Greek tragedy. And so he wrote a book called The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music. And of course it was inspired by his experience with the Wagners, and he was inspired by what music was. He was a devotee of music. He was a great pianist, so he loved the music and he knew what he was talking about. But in his book, what he was going to do was take his knowledge of music and join it together to his knowledge of Greek theater and create this very great book. People still read it, The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music. So in other words, in the book, he talks about Dionysus, the Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry, and of joy and ecstatic emotion and inspiration, which is true. That's what Dionysus is all about. Music, the god of song and music and dance. And then, Nietzsche argues, the god Apollo was brought into Greece by travelers, and then that new god, the god of leisure, repose, intellectual contemplation, logical order, philosophical calm, that was joined to the Dionysian spirit. And so it was these two spirits, these two opposing spirits, that came together in the greatness of Greek theater. So it's a great idea. It's basically correct. People now, when they study Greek theater, they read this book right away. And it was true. But it's just a little insight into how his life went and how fully he could throw himself into something and almost without thinking about it, give himself completely over to a passion, in this case Wagnerian music, and then go through a withdrawal. Now, right in the middle of these years comes the Franco-Prussian War. From 1870 to 1871, the King of Prussia, the man after whom Nietzsche is named, and his government, Bismarck, decide that a quick war with France is the best possible way to unify Germany. And so they plan a war where they will invade France and they will win quickly. And when it's all over, war cause will have brought about a unification of Germany. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to unify all of Germany around Berlin. They wanted Berlin to be the capital. They wanted the king of Prussia to be the king of Germany, and that's exactly what they did. So Nietzsche gets drawn into this because, of course, he's the right age. He is Prussian, even though he's living in Basel. So he volunteers to join the quickly forming Prussian army. And so he goes in as a medical orderly and ambulance driver because he has some health issues. He still has vision problems. You can see him right there with his glasses on. So he went in for the purpose of helping in the war, and he writes about it. He thinks about it. Now, during the war, he contracts diphtheria, and so he has to be sent home. But he still serves. Here is the king of Prussia, who is going to help lead the war, and his prime minister, Bismarck. There's the invasion. And so Germany invades France. The troops go in very, very fast. And here is romantic Nietzsche. Our country calls, our souls become forgetful of themselves. At its bloody appeal, the multitude is urged to courage and uplifted heroism. So here is his nationalistic, patriotic self being called to serve. Yes, yes, I am going to do it. I will do it. And here's part of Romanticism. So we've just talked about that with the Wagners and with his wild passion for them. Here's another aspect of it. So remember, Nietzsche, in all his cold, careful, analytical self, is also the passionate romantic. He's both. He's both sides of the 19th century. And he's on the road to Frankfurt, where he will officially go into the military and be signed up. And he saw a troop of cavalry passing with magnificent clatter and display through the town there and then. And he says, and this is in a letter, he gets the perception, the vision out of which was to grow his entire philosophy. So pay attention to this, because this is retrospectively, and just note what he says here, that he's on the road, he sees these troops, magnificent display, and he says he came to the perception, the vision out of which his philosophy would grow. I felt for the first time that the strongest and highest will, the will to life, does not find expression in a miserable struggle for existence, but in a will to war, a will to power, a will to overpower. So there's the kernel. And when we talk about the last great book of his life, Thus Spake Zarathustra, there is that kernel. There's the piece. The will to war, the will to power, or the will to overpower. So here he is now, going off to volunteer.